The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, American Aspirations in Afghanistan. Debate surrounding the United States policy in Afghanistan has recently been revived by President Trump's demand that the Bagram Air Base be returned to U.S. control. Why is Bagram so significant? Does the U.S. want to regain a strategic foothold in Central Asia following its 2021 military withdrawal? How might retaking the airbase impact U.S. counterterrorism operations and regional stability? And what are America's long-term aspirations in Afghanistan? To learn more about these and related issues, tune into our live debate, bringing your comments and questions for our expert panel.
Hello and welcome. I'm Humphrey Hawksley. This is a Democracy Forum debate where we examine issues that are critical to all our lives, yet too often are overlooked by the mainstream media and commentariat. American aspirations in Afghanistan. What strategic complexities lay beneath that pithy Trumpian soundbite that America needed to take back the Bagram Air Base, returning it to those who built it? What flows of influence now run through Afghanistan, China, Russia, India, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Iran? Afghanistan, it seems, in geopolitics is a land blooded with impossible longings. 4 years after its defeat, what now are America's aspirations? To answer that question, we have a superb Democracy Forum panel: Giuliano, Bifolchi, Nazifa, Haqpal, and Antonio Giustozzi. And before we hear from them, I have the privilege of asking the Democracy Forum president, Lord Charles Bruce, to give us the background and to lay out the canvas of our debate. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Welcome to the webinar today, which will focus on the question of how the Trump administration intends to reconnect with Afghanistan 5 years after signing the Doha Accords with the Taliban in February 2020, the consequent withdrawal of United States troops, and the subsequent evacuation of over 120,000 international military personnel and civilian staff by the air forces of over 40 participating countries. I'm very grateful to the team at TDF for selecting this topic for our discussion and for inviting a panel of renowned experts to give us their perspective under the moderation of Humphrey Hawksley. During his state visit to the United Kingdom on September the 18th, President Trump let it be known that he would like Bagram Military Air Base to be returned to United States control. I quote, "We want it back," he said, and referred to the precipitous military withdrawal 4 years before as, I quote, "the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country." And responding to this aspiration, the Afghan Foreign Minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, issued an emphatic denial. I quote, "Not even 1 meter of land will be given to the United States," he said. Over the last 4 years, however, at least 15 countries have overcome their reservations and re-established diplomatic connections with the Taliban government, principally Russia, China, Iran, and several Gulf states. As The Economist suggests, I quote, "The world is learning how to live with the Taliban." And in July, Russia became the first country formally to recognize the Taliban government. And in the same month, the foreign ministers of China, Pakistan, and Russia met in Kabul to discuss deepening cooperation, including extending the China-Pakistan economic corridor into Afghanistan. And just 2 weeks ago, Amir Khan Muttaqi visited Delhi for a meeting with the Indian Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar. Reacting to this visit, the Observer Research Foundation explains, I quote, "For the Taliban, engagement with India allows them to create a perception of legitimacy for their domestic constituents and allows them to hedge their bets, carving out an identity separate from their overdependence on Pakistan." Although President Trump has flagged up the desire to regain control of Bagram at his first cabinet meeting in February, the official United States foreign policy position on Taliban-controlled Afghanistan was clearly explained in July by Jonathan Schreier, acting United States representative to United Nations Economic and Social Council, when he expressed deep skepticism about the Taliban's willingness to participate in good faith, adding, I quote, "When they are willing to change, it's only on their terms and to the detriment of our interests. Their actions have left us unconvinced that they will ever offer real concessions or pursue policies in accordance with the expectations of the international community. Indeed, it's debatable what strategic advantage would be gained by President Trump's plan to recover a military presence in Afghanistan." A report published by the Brookings Institute in August last year, speculating on the future for Taliban-controlled Afghanistan and its relationship with the West, suggests that, I quote, "suppressing terrorism remains the United States' primary interest," and advises the president that, I quote, "for now, the United States should reconcile itself to building a low-level equilibrium with the Taliban." Well, I'll be very interested to hear the panel's comments on the subject, and if you have any questions or comments, please pass them through to the panel through the chair.
Lord Bruce, thank you very much for that low-level equilibrium. What strategic advantage? Suppressing terrorism. Each of our three panelists will speak from around 7 minutes, and then the Democracy Forum Chair, Barry Gardiner, will be summing up to give us his view of the debate, and then I will return to the panelists for a short answer on what American aspirations are in Afghanistan. Please, as Lord Bruce said, put in your questions and comments, and I will feed them into the discussion. Our first speaker is Dr. Giuliano Bifolchi of SpecialEurasia, a geopolitical intelligence and risk assessment agency with an expertise in Islamic history and peace-building management. So let's begin with that catalyst soundbite that America wants to take back Bagram Air Base. Giuliano Bifolchi, tell us why and what that means. I think he is muted.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, and it's a pleasure. And I prepare a couple of slides just to show the reason why. The first, I hope that you can see the slide. The first reason is the strategic point of view. If you see the Bagram Air Base where it is located in Afghanistan, it is located in the epicenter of geopolitical, military, strategic interest. It's closest to Kabul. It can allow also the deployment of different military forces in the country. It is close also to several Central Asian republics, particularly some are very important like Tajikistan, where in Tajikistan it is also located the 201st Russian military base. It is closer to China, particularly to those factories and the industrial area of China, where according to USA intelligence, also some statement by USA President Donald Trump, the Chinese have their nuclear weapons facilities and industry in that area. Therefore, the first important aspect of Bagram Air Base is from the military point of view, strategic point of view. In addition, we should talk also about intelligence, because having a presence, particularly like a Central Intelligence Agency or military intelligence officer at the Bagram Air Base, will allow the United States to conduct different intelligence operations on the ground, and for sure to counter the terrorism problem. We are talking about Al-Qaeda, and there are several reports which stated that Al-Qaeda is still present in Afghanistan, but also they have different training centers also regarding the drones, how to use drones for terrorist attacks, and the Islamic State wilayat Khorasan. And the last point, as I told you before, is for sure to counter the Chinese, but to counter also the Russian increasing presence in Afghanistan. If we consider the fact that in July 2025, the Russian Federation officially recognized the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Therefore, if we think about the Bagram Air Base and what Trump stated, first First, these are the geopolitical, strategic, and military reasons. Another reason is to put pressures on the Taliban, on Afghanistan, and to increase the attentions, also the narrative regarding Afghanistan, regarding the Bagram Air Base, and to please, on the other hand, some requests coming from the USA military intelligence world, particularly because after the USA troops withdrew in 2021, there was a huge disappointment of what's happening and the way the USA troops withdrawn from the country. It is also an opportunity to Trump to counterbalance the geopolitical dynamics and to influence the Central Asia, since Afghanistan share its borders with several Central Asian countries. And if we want to state the ultimate goals, like if we want to see why USA has this strategic interest, Afghanistan still matters if we look at the geopolitical dimensions of Eurasia. It is important because of its strategic position, because thanks to the influence of the control of Afghanistan, particularly via the military base as a Bagram Air Base, which is one of the biggest facilities that we can have in Asia. It has different compounds and an area which allows the easily deployment of a different kind of military troops on the ground. So thanks to this military presence and a possible new presence of the United States in Afghanistan, the USA can control the entire region and can also try to project influence in Central Asia, in South Asia, and to control Iran, Pakistan, China. It is not just a coincidence that after Trump declared, stated that the USA wants back Bagram Air Base, Pakistan decided to increase its military operation against Afghanistan, and we had this military escalation of the borders, and also we had the Pakistan directly bombed in Kabul some specific targets in the last couple of weeks. So, first of all, geopolitical dimension. Secondly, counter-terrorism, because terrorism is still a problem, is still a threat, and terrorism is still important in the narrative of the United States, in the domestic policy, in the foreign policy, and also to promote the Trump administration success. So thanks to Afghanistan, it's possible to counter different terrorist groups, as I said before, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, Wilayat Khorasan, and in the hand, because the mining resources, the rare earth, and all the possible economic interests inside Afghanistan. The military presence will also allow USA to support different USA companies on the ground, particularly in the mining sector. If we consider also that at the present moment, there were some issues and problems between some Chinese companies and the Taliban government regarding the exploitation of some specific mining fields or oil fields. Therefore, we have also the economic component, which will push more and more USA to promote its interests in Afghanistan. So to summarize, military importance of Bagram Air Base to deploy military forces to counter China, particularly China, to control Central Asia. From the counterterrorism point of view, to fight the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, and from the economic point of view, to exploit the mining sources, the mining field of Afghanistan, and to also to promote the USA companies in the area. So just to mention some of the possible USA interests related also to the Bagram Air Base. Thanks.
Giuliano, thank you very much for that. What can America possibly offer the Taliban? Trump is, after all, a deal maker, to make them even think about
stay in power.
Go on, expand on that.
Yeah, well, the fact is that, as I said during my small, short presentation, it is not a coincidence, according to me, that Pakistan decided to increase the military escalation with Afghanistan after Trump stated that the USA wants back Bagram Air Base. Because, let's say, speaking honestly, Pakistan has had the problems with Taliban Pakistan for years. It is not the first time. So, but now they decided to put in the hand of the Taliban and to have this military escalation, and they decide also to organize a military operation to bomb, to strike also Kabul. So now the Taliban, they should demonstrate that they can stay in power and they can face external pressure.
So just to clarify this, America, however it's saying, in your view, America is saying, if you give us back Bagram Air Base, we will ensure that your regime stays in power?
Not ensure, we will give an opportunity.
We will help. And this is the regime that has got the most appalling human rights record of pretty much any regime, and the general culture of treating women and girls and that. So America would then be supporting that policy.
I'm not saying that they will be supported. I mean, say that if they want to close a deal, probably what they will say is okay, we can support you in a different government with all these also minorities, but at least you will have still some part of the power. Because if America started bringing more pressures on the Taliban, and particularly from supporting, for instance, the Pakistani military operation, it's very hard for the Taliban that they can stay in power. At the moment, with no pressure, the Taliban can govern for the next, 5 or 10 years with no pressure from outside, because there is not a political or military force inside the country which can really, put any kind of pressures or threat to the Taliban. But
sorry. I just wanted to put in a question that's coming from our audience from Rimjim Sud. A great question. How do U.S. aspirations, I'm going to add to that, how do any nation's aspirations for Afghanistan differ today than from in the past?
Well, let's say that the different aspiration, I can say that we have a different geopolitical conditions now. Because for the first time, Russia, which is now one of the main enemies of the United States and the West, officially recognized the Taliban regime and are increasing their economic operations on the ground. If you think also that the Taliban have visited in the last year 5 or 6 times in Russia, and they attend a different also official economic business forum with Russia. So that we have different geopolitical conditions. So the aspirations now is, first of all, do not allow any foreign entities to become the major country involved in Afghanistan.
Okay, that's that is great. And just before I let you go for the moment, let's assume that this is not going to happen, the return of Bagram Air Base. What are the other leverage points between the Taliban and America that could happen during Trump's administration?
Well, they can review the draw agreement. If we look at the draw agreement, we can see that the Taliban, they didn't respect several of the points of the draw agreement. And they can put pressures on this side. They can also try to influence other countries to stop having any kind of dialogue with the Taliban. So more isolation will result in more economic problems. And one layer could be tried to, as I said before, or support Pakistan. In this way, military support to Pakistan can also allow Islamabad to become more distant to Beijing. And they can try also to support the North Resistance Front of Afghanistan. Until now, it's a small, no one supported them. They have just some, representative in Tajikistan, but nothing serious. So they can try to use different layers, different actors, just to isolate more the country and to put more pressures in the military point of view.
Thank you very much. Stay with us because we will be coming back to you. We're now going to look more regionally at it with Nazifa Haqpal, Director of Aspire Expert Research Consultancy that provides witness expert reports on many countries, including Afghanistan as its specialist area. And while distant from America, regionally what unfolds in Afghanistan is hard to impact. The current conflict between the Taliban and Pakistan, the roles of India and Iran, and so on. So Nazifa Haqpal, paint us a picture of what's going on now and how America fits into that.
Thank you so much, Humphrey, for your kind introduction. First, let me thank also Charles Bruce for inviting me to today's panel. I'll focus on the America aspiration amid shifting regional dynamics, particularly in the context of Taliban's regional alliances which are shifting. The recent peace talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan in Istanbul, and the new developments surrounding them, as well as India's evolving relationship with the Taliban. These developments remind us that the geopolitics of Afghanistan are changing. These shifts will shape Afghanistan's security, humanitarian, and economic prospects, as well as the response of regional countries, may also in turn influence U.S. foreign policy towards Afghanistan. As we know, according to U.S. foreign policy, if not in practice, but at least in written, is very straightforward: a stable, sovereign Afghanistan that does not serve a safe haven for transnational terrorism, a country whose people can pursue basic rights and livelihoods, in a regional environment which cooperation, in which there is cooperation, not proxy conflict. However, if we assess the Americans' approach over the past 4 years, we can acknowledge that with the Trump second term in office, he cut around $1.8 billion in USAID aid to Afghanistan, suspending most humanitarian programs and leaving millions without essential services. His first or America First policy shifted U.S. engagement to a narrow focus on counterterrorism and hostage diplomacy or recovery. It itself deprioritized the long-term stabilization of Afghanistan as well as the region. This reduction in aid worsened Afghanistan humanitarian and socio-economic challenges. In response, if we assess the Taliban foreign policy, they sought stronger regional ties. It is also evident that they have pivoted towards regional pragmatism after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. They try to engage in pragmatic engagement with the neighboring countries, Iran, Pakistan. Now with Pakistan, it's changing. With China as well, with India, it's opposite to Pakistan. It's getting better, their relationship. And with as well with the Central Asian states. However, without Western recognition or sustained financial assistance, Afghanistan will remain economically fragile, and diplomatically we can see that it's isolated with sanction imposed by the UN as well, other restriction on their leaders. Their leaders are under the ICC warrant, arrest warrant. So yet the question remains, what could be American aspiration in Afghanistan amid this challenging regional and shifting in challenging regional dynamics. The question that can the United States pursue a balanced strategy that reflects both in light of evolving regional realities? Can they also endure American principles given the Taliban's ties, such as with militant groups such as with the TTP? And then we see a huge level of suppression of Afghan citizens, as you mentioned, Humphrey, in your question, or particularly the restriction that they have imposed on women, which deprive them of fundamental freedoms. So to focus on this, I would try to summarize the landscape of regional alliances of the Taliban, which are changing. And so we saw that this regional alignments also not only it's changing, but also it seems that it's fractured. It's also created a kind of new alignments as well as rivalries, which is evident in recent Istanbul talks that concluded yesterday. So Pakistan, long viewed as the Taliban closest ally, now faces growing fractions with Kabul. The core issues center on TTP, a militant group ideologically, which is also historically aligned with the Afghan Taliban. But now, from the day one, they were hostile to Pakistani states, and now their attacks are intensified against the Pakistani states, and particularly the army. Islamabad, we saw that in Doha, they have they agreed on a ceasefire, but that ceasefire was fragile, and they continue to have the talks in Istanbul. And the failure of these 3 days of talks in Istanbul itself is evidence that how much the tension is between these two countries, to the level that today the Taliban Interior Ministry spokesperson, they threatened Pakistan with a less than 5 war, and it said that, or he said that we will give Pakistan a lesson just we previously gave their fathers to the US, Russia, and Britain. So there is a huge tension, but shifting from Pakistan to across other capitals, distance from Kabul, such as India, we can see that there is a new alignment or shaping, particularly with Russia, that recently recognized the Taliban regime. And after the 10 October visit of Muttaqi to India, India also publicly announced opening of their embassy in Kabul. So India historically, though, had alignment with anti-Taliban factions, but now has cautiously re-engaging with the Taliban. So while not officially recognizing the Taliban regime, so announcing the embassy opening itself shows a different level of engagement with the Taliban. And this is a pragmatic shift. India's strategy is now seems not to be guided by ideology, but more by necessity to prevent Afghanistan from a hub for anti-India militancy, to counter Pakistan's influence. And we have seen historically that the Taliban were under the influence of Pakistan, given sanctuaries in Pakistan, trained in Pakistan. So they want to counter now the influence of Pakistan as well. They want to preserve a regional connectivity role, linking South Asia with Central Asia. So here, I think with this dynamic in light of this dynamic, I think Washington can play a role. So for Washington, India's evolving engagement should present an opportunity to coordinate approaches that advance mutual objective, and it could be counterterrorism, humanitarian access, and the prevention of extremist resurgence. So amid these alignments, it is difficult for the US to balance their aspiration in Afghanistan. Bagram is another issue which another panelist mentioned. But while there might be more economic kind of incentive as well playing the role in Afghanistan by the US, but more, I think their role will be driven by their security interest in Afghanistan. And we saw that recently, even President Trump also showed a willingness to solve the peace or to mediate the peace talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Given this example, I believe still there are few objectives that can shape America's aspiration in Afghanistan. First, reducing tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is important not only for Afghanistan or Pakistan, but also for regional security. and we know that the reports from the UN and other agencies indicates that there is presence of militant activities in Afghanistan. So preventing the re-emergence of Afghanistan is a launchpad for terrorism, could be one of the important aspects that the US should aspire to play a role in Afghanistan. Also promote a accountable engagement in terms of regional cooperation. We can see that there are many mechanisms from SARC to ECO and others in the regions, but it seems that these mechanisms are not working to the objective that they have been set up. Also, there is another challenge, which is coming out of Afghanistan territory, and that is the illicit arm and resources flow that itself fuels violence, and these uncontrolled movement of weapons and funds itself destabilize Afghanistan and its neighbor. The US will coordinate with partners, it could be Pakistan and other partners, to target and sanction those movement of illicit arm to the region that fuels the regional security. And then advancing humanitarian and development pathways itself is important, because at the end of the day, if you if you explore and examine the extremist ideas or extremist, at least why these region wars have the poverty and displacement are one of the drivers of instability in these area. So I think there should be a kind of livelihood assistance, ensuring that aid should reach civilians, particularly with the expel of refugees from Iran and Pakistan, that around 2 million people were expelled and more are on the verge of expulsion. So this can fuel this conflict or instability. And to conclude, I would say that US aspiration in Afghanistan must navigate a complex and shifting regional landscape shaped by the Taliban's changing alliances, ongoing tension with the Pakistan, and evolving engagement, which has a different engagement or as after the US withdrawal, but the
I think you're dropping out a lot. If you can hear me, I'd just like to
quite a lot.
Yes, you were dropping out at the end there, but if you can hear me, thank you very much for that. That was a very clear thing. Is the primary interest of America in Afghanistan at the moment to stop the export of terror?
I think if we look at and examine the Doha Accord and the cooperation that was, or the engagement of the US with the Taliban, whether it was their meetings with a US diplomat in Doha, or when the US diplomat also visited Afghanistan, I think there is a kind of intelligent cooperation between Taliban and in the US.
The Doha Accords are 5 years old now. In the current, balance of power or elements that are going on there, is that their primary objective, or is it more subtle than that?
I mean, it's definitely changing. It's changing. But I still believe that even if the Doha Accord is 5 years old, there are secret annexes to that, but not only based on Doha Accord. also based on their engagement, because there is always a call from, not from Afghans, but also from many Americans and human rights advocates, that the U.S. should not engage with the Taliban, and it should be conditioned. And the money, which is the U.S. is the number one funder of Afghanistan. Also, the government is running through the U.S. money, sustaining without the U.S. fund and engagement. I think the Taliban regime wouldn't last this almost 5 years now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Stay with us. We will come back to you. And now we go to our third panelist, Antonio Giustozzi, Senior Research Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute and visiting professor at King's College London. He has written or edited numerous books, such as Empires of Mud, which is on warlordism in Afghanistan and the Taliban at war, which covered the 20 years until its victory in 2021. So, Antonio, American aspirations in Afghanistan, what are they? Tell us what you know.
Thank you very much. Of course, none of us, I think, really knows what is in the mind of Donald Trump. I do think that there might be converging concerns between different agencies of the American state. So I do think that Donald Trump has his own concerns, which in fact he highlighted already even before taking charge as the president. He mentioned, at least the Taliban said, that he received messages from him, from his team, about Bagram Air Base that was raised after he became president, now again recently. So that's a concern of him that I think has got to do with his electoral campaign and his criticism of how President Biden handled that. And it's something that I think has to do with his base. He needs to feed these kind of things to his base, to the MAGA base. I'm not sure whether that's a particularly high priority in reality for his foreign policy making. But aside from that, and predating that, there was certainly a line of thinking, especially in American intelligence world, that somehow some kind of engagement with the Taliban might be useful, if not necessary. And certainly there were approaches. Now, we do know that senior Taliban figures, not all of them, but some of them have been meeting American intelligence officers in the Gulf countries, certainly in the UAE, probably Doha, and they've been discussing matters. We also know that other very senior officials, including the Amir Abatullah, oppose this kind of engagement with Americans, but it's been going on now for quite a few years. So I think that there is a persistent interest in the US about some kind of engagement, exactly what they're trying to achieve. I'm not convinced that in general there's a very strong interest within what Trump himself would call the deep state in the US for reestablishing an actual military base in Bagram. That would be difficult to sustain. In fact, it could be detrimental, I think, to U.S. defense interests, because Bagram is very well positioned, but also a very risky position, very exposed. And one of the reasons why the Americans are no longer there is that Afghanistan, in the middle of Central Asia, between Central Asia and South Asia, is surrounded by countries that would centrally meddle in the past. Now, Pakistan might be more friendly to American interests right now, but it was also in 2001. It didn't last. And then, of course, the Iranians, the Chinese, the Russians will not be certainly keen to see the Americans in Bagram. Reestablishing a significant military presence in Bagram would be quite expensive, because it would need to be well protected. You would need to deploy several thousands troops there just to secure the base, operate the base. You would need air defense. You would need multiple rings of security around the base, and would still be, essentially an isolated base in the middle of nowhere, potentially surrounded by hostile elements. It's clear that within the Taliban there are divisions with regard to the return of the Americans. Some senior figures were inclined to accept that, of course, in exchange for something. Apparently, when they were approached, the Trump representatives were offering money, funding, and also diplomatic recognition in exchange for Bagram Air Base. So that was what was motivating some of these Taliban officials. But in terms of the grassroots, the Taliban rank and file, there is almost universal hostility to the idea of a return of the Americans. They think, probably correctly, it would be quite delegitimizing for the Taliban from the point of view even of their own supporters, having the Americans returning, and probably wouldn't be worth it for the Taliban. In any case, even the Taliban ever agreed to let the Americans back into Bagram, clearly would not be a general consensus within the Taliban that is a good thing. It would be relatively easy for for the intelligence agencies of neighboring countries to meddle, to create threats. Bagram, even when the Americans were there in the first 20 years of this century, they were constantly under rocket attacks. It could be even worse now, because at the time there was a government of some kind in Afghanistan was trying to contribute to the protection of Bagram. Now it's not clear that they would be, the Taliban would be able to, or even willing to offer protection. So I'm not sure whether it would be such a great idea for the Americans. It makes more sense as a kind of intelligence base, but then again, any intelligence presence also has to be protected. You don't just send American citizens in the middle of nowhere like that. So I'm not sure whether they really want to be there. I suspect that part of the game might be signaling to China that the American also can be aggressive, as a form of pressure on China, if you like, the threat of reestablishing a presence in the middle of Central Asia close to to a sensitive Chinese border. That could be one dimension. And I think, as Giuliano mentioned before, it is quite possible that there is some connection with the newly found friendship with Pakistan after a period of rather frosty relations. I suspect also that the newly found Pakistani assertiveness vis-a-vis Afghanistan might not be unconnected to this move from the Trump administration. There may be a concerted effort to put pressure on the Taliban. Of course, the motives would be different for the Pakistani from the Americans, but they must still be, to some degree, coordinated. And what will be the end? Certainly, perhaps force the Taliban to be more forthcoming in terms of negotiations with both the Americans and the Pakistanis, and also perhaps more than that, perhaps an attempt to split the Taliban, to sow division within the Taliban. And that, in terms of Pakistan, could be also perhaps an attempt, not in the short term, but in the medium term, perhaps, to cause some kind of change in the correlation of forces within the Taliban, perhaps leading to the empowerment of factions within the Taliban which are stronger connection to Pakistan at the expense of others that don't have those connections. That's also a possibility. As I say, we have to speculate here because what actually is going on, we don't know. We have. I think I'm sure the Taliban also wonder the same. What are the Americans up to? What they really want? I think they're also puzzled by what purpose would really serve for the Americans to be in Bagram, because the Taliban know full well at the extent to which neighboring countries in the past, during the American occupation ended in 2021, the extent to which these countries are supporting the Taliban, helping the Taliban to undermine American presence there. So do the Americans really want to come back and expose themselves to the same kind of pressure and force as in the past? That's probably a good question to ask. So I would imagine that perhaps it's not so much about being in Bagram, but it's about this wider characteristic, of the Trump administration of constantly signaling to all kinds of interlocutors, local, international, about showing, assertiveness, putting pressure on different fronts. Perhaps it's only part of that wider effort to show, in this case, to China, but also to Russia and to Iran, the Americans are not giving up, and they are they're able to counterattack, if you like. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. No, they're able to play their part, so they're not giving up 4 years after the defeat. Could you triage it or prioritize it for us in a nutshell? Like I asked before, is it primarily about stopping an export of terror from Afghanistan? Is it about destabilizing China or destabilizing the Russian satellite states? Is it about the minerals that are there or something else? Is there a top line of aspiration?
Yeah. My impression, based not only on Afghanistan, but also my work on counterterrorism, is that in the US in particular, counterterrorism is now way down in terms of priorities, is collapsed compared to what it was a few years ago. Already during the Biden administration was really losing ground in terms of interest, but the ground now is quite low. There is no funding, there is no real interest. I think they don't worry too much about that. I think one factor is certainly signaling to China. Destabilizing China would be to say too much. Biden's not going to destabilize China, but it's one of many tools of pressure that, of course, they try to apply, whether it's trade wars or relations with countries neighboring China, not only Afghanistan, but from Japan these days and all over the place. So it could be that. And I think this new friendly relation with the Pakistanis might be something that the Trump administration might want to cultivate, and it might be related to that, as I mentioned. I would say these are the three main.
Could I then give you a question from Philip Bowman that's might be related to that? Since there's a big ideological divide between India and the Taliban, how might the India-Afghanistan relationship play out in the long term? And how do Afghans at home view it?
Well, from the point of view of the Taliban, it's not the first time they establish relations which might become close in the future. For now, we're just at the start of this process. For example, in 2016, the current Emir established a warm relation with Russia. At that time, Russia was, of course, you will remember, in the midst of the Syrian civil war. Before that, of course, it was not Russia per se, it was the Soviet Union that fought in Afghanistan, but Russia fought in Chechnya. So Russia was not at the time a particularly popular country with Muslim publics around the world. So it was actually quite a controversial thing to do for the Emir at the time to establish that kind of relationship. So it's not the first time, and the Taliban, when they want, can be pragmatic. From the point of view of India, of course, they see an opportunity to upset the Pakistanis. I think that they know the moment this kind of improving relations are well advertised in the media, the Pakistan have to react somehow. They know that from the Pakistani point of view, it's impossible not to react. So at work, what the Indians achieve is to create trouble for the Pakistani and force them to react in somehow, which is expensive, for the Pakistanis. Whereas for Afghanistan, this kind of situation with Pakistan is risky. It is also risky for Pakistan. So that itself is probably just worthwhile for the Indians.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to bring in the other two panelists for a couple of questions that have come in from the audience before we go to Barry Gardiner, bringing in the sort of human rights element here. Well, a couple of things. One is the bit about playing its part. This is from Margaret Barry. In the light of the Trump administration's success so far in the Middle East, might this increase confidence regarding US aspirations to influence Afghanistan's future through diplomatic channels? I'd also like to put in Amit Rana's question there. What influence can the US have going forward, especially considering the current administration in the White House, in impacting the Taliban's policies and behavior in its treatment of women and girls, minority groups, human rights in general? So here we have encapsulated if Trump wants, if America wants Bagram Air Base, is it going to allow this mistreatment of human rights to go on? And is it seen to have a bigger presence because of its other influence in the Middle East? Giuliano Bifolchi.
Well, regarding the human rights, let's say that USA and the West, they are cooperating with several countries where human rights is the main issues and problem, but no one is put a lot of emphasis on pressures regarding this because business geopolitics matters more. So let's say that is more important for strategic communication in the media than when we talk about politics and military affairs.
So it's separated. It's not part of the political decision-making anymore.
Unfortunately to say that if we look also in the last 5 years, all the issues regarding human rights, and we can mention several countries with that USA and also the West Europe are cooperating. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, they have problems with human rights. Not the same level of Afghanistan, but they have still problems. But we are closing deals. So let's say the human rights probably they are more in the press, more in some circles than when we talk about geopolitics and business and military affairs.
Nazifa, Haqpal, do you agree with that?
To some extent, I do. Given even during the first Taliban regime that they just closed their eyes on all suppression that women were facing. But when the geopolitics changed, when there was imminent threat from Afghanistan, then we have seen that, human rights mattered, state building mattered, but not during the time that there was suppression. And similar, it's happening now at the moment. Particularly seems that over Gaza issue and the Netanyahu has ICC arrest. Yeah. But you see the engagement of or the support that the Israel getting from the US. It also has undermined the US legitimacy in terms of championing for human rights or women's rights. But although I just want to add one sentence that although there are many countries that are violators of human rights, but the severe or the grave violation of women's rights in Afghanistan is unprecedented in any context, in any country. So in this kind of context, I think still the US taking any step in terms of legitimizing the regime, recognition, or Bagram Air Base, I think they should reconsider and think twice because, there are groups that at the moment in the US advocating for women's rights and they have concern.
And Antonio, that's not going to happen, is it? They, as Giuliano said, they're separated now. Human rights is not part of negotiations, or is that right?
What the Taliban said that when they were approached by Trump's representatives, nobody mentions any human rights or women's rights, all about business essentially. So recognition and aid versus control over Bagram Air Base. Even in Congress, especially on the Republican side, there's been noise, quite a lot of noise starting from last year about Afghanistan, but this mostly focused on not so much these issues actually, but more about the weapons left behind, which Trump promised to recover, which has been forgotten now because in reality these weapons are mostly junk. Yeah. And what was valuable is already dispersed across a few continents. Some Afghan weapons have been found in Africa now, so already been traded far away, especially night vision equipment is what is in high demand. So probably there's not much left to recover. And the last thing is there are still people in Congress worried about the terror dimension. It's not at the agency level. It's a congressman, especially Republican congressman. I don't get the sense that Trump is too worried about that, though.
Okay, thank you for that. We are now going to the Democracy Forum Chair, Barry Gardiner, who has been listening in to the points you've raised and is going to be summing up for us, after which I'm going to return to each of you for a 1 second line on what the aspirations are of America. But Barry, over to you.
Wouldn't it be nice if American foreign policy in Afghanistan could be summed up in 1 second?
Yes, well, Trump indeed. Tries to, doesn't he?
Well, he sums up everything in 1 second. He's the greatest president that the world has ever known, as we all know. And given that I'm sitting here in Washington, it's only prudent that I should declare that. The British sense of irony, you will note, is not yet dead. Look, Charles set the scene talking about the way in which Russia, China, and Iran show the world is learning how to live with the Taliban. He mentioned the visit with Jaishankar and the way in which there's a new track developing there between India and Afghanistan. I think unconvinced of the Taliban's bona fides, he said, and suppressing terrorism needs a low level of equilibrium. He used that phrase, which Humphrey, you picked up on quite rightly, I think. Giuliano Bifolchi talked about the geostrategic importance of the airbase close to China for intelligence and a strategic node for operations to counter Al-Qaeda and other terrorist operations, and to perhaps coordinate military operations against a Chinese nuclear threat. So he sort of broke it down into three: the geopolitical pivot, projecting regional influence by the US, the essential focus on counterterrorism, and then a third, which I think he would accept was a much an ancillary one, the potential for resources, economic resources, minerals, etc. Nazifa Haqpal talked very much about the shifting regional dynamics, focused on the peace talks, but also on the Indian interaction, and of course the food aid that is being given by India to Afghanistan, which I think is a strategic move on India's part to make sure that she is not subjected to any terrorist incursions that might originate in Afghanistan. A stable Afghanistan, she said, but Trump has cut 1.8 billion in aid, and that makes, I think she used the wonderful understatement of saying that made long-term stabilization more difficult. The art of litotes also is not yet dead. Taliban tried engagement with the region, but really were isolated. She talked about the suppression of citizens and of women, and the core issues centered on TTP, militant group attacking Pakistan. Shifting from Pakistan to India and the Indian embassy in Kabul, pragmatic shift, she said, to stop Afghan deploying militants against India. I think that's absolutely right. It goes back to the old "my enemy's enemy is my friend." And she said that there were few objectives of the US, perhaps to reduce Pakistan-Afghan tension. I think here I would note what the US Army War College Quarterly reported, and that was, I quote them saying, US paid handsomely for Pakistan's cooperation whilst lacking the leverage to stem its duplicitous support for the Taliban. And America has always engaged with Pakistan for a purpose in Afghanistan, but never really understood just when Pakistan was going to shift the balance and turn the knife in. Refugees fuel conflict, she said quite rightly, and again said the US aspiration must navigate Afghans' regional shifting alliances. Antonio Giustozzi, none of us knows, he said, what is in the mind of Donald Trump. Never a truer word said. And also, I would say probably Donald Trump isn't often sure what is in the mind of Donald Trump. But of course, he pointed out, I thought very astutely, that Trump had been extraordinarily critical of Biden's handling of Afghanistan, and that part of his aspiration might well be an appeal to the domestic base, the MAGA base, and you know, they do say all politics is domestic, so it would be foolish to discount that as one of the reasons that Trump is trying to project, at any rate, American interest there. He spoke of the senior officials being engaged, but not sure what US can really sustain. a presence in Bagram against the undoubted opposition that it would incur from, he said, China, Iran, and others, and the thousands of troops that would be required to hold that base against in what would be a hostile area. He said the Taliban have strong opposition to a US return, and Bagram would become a focus of threats. I think that's absolutely undeniable. And he also said, of course, that part of the game is signaling to China. So there would appear to be very much the smoke and mirrors of diplomacy here. It may be diplomacy internationally, it may be diplomacy with the domestic power base, but certainly, Antonio, they're talking about how much of this is to send messages rather than necessarily to implement action on the ground. I wanted to sort of conclude by just finding something that Diego Rees-Palmer, NATO's head of the Net Assessment Section, noted, and I thought this was an important point made. He said the troubled legacy of 3 decades of civil strife since 1973, including a decade of Soviet military occupation between 79 and 89, which had left Afghanistan devastated and its population fractured. He said violence, drug trafficking, and corruption became endemic, fueled by interethnic hatreds and warlord rivalries, leaving the general population, notably women and children, in a state of disheartening neglect and despair. No amount of international aid and assistance, no matter how well intentioned and delivered, could have overcome this legacy easily, he said. And I think if you look at what the U.S. Congressional Commission on the war in Afghanistan has said, they have said that they went in primarily to stop terrorist attacks, a future Al-Qaeda attack, and they got deflected or diffused of purpose in that they started to think about nation building. But in the light of what the quote I've just given from Palmer, it's clear that nation building is much more difficult when there is not one nation to build it around, but a series of different groups, different ethnic, religious, and political groups who have been warring against each other. And in that sense, nation building was always a fraught exercise. Thank you very much.
Barry, thank you very much. Very thoughtful. And I would like to go back to the panel for the one sentence about just to say what the American aspiration in Afghanistan. Giuliano Bifolchi.
Muted.
Giuliano.
In one sentence, the American aspiration in Afghanistan are like current now, just a possibility and a probability. Is it possible the USA will be more involved in Afghanistan? Yes. It's possible that it will be more interested in the Bagram Air Base? Yes. It's probable at the moment, 5%, speaking in intelligence way.
Okay, thank you for that. Nazifa Haqpal.
I think America's aspiration in Afghanistan revolve around its national interest, and its national interest amid fast-changing, not only regional dynamic, but also, world order. I think it's changing. So based on that, it's very difficult to sum in one sentence American aspiration at the moment.
National interest is a good one to sum up with. So thank you for that. Antonio Giustozzi.
Yeah, I think that the U.S. intent is to show they are still able to put pressure on geopolitical rivals, no matter where, including in Afghanistan, where they left not so long ago.
Okay, thank you. The American reach, maintaining its view of the world order. That's it. Thank you. Time's winged chariot attacks us, and we are at an end. In fact, we are slightly over time. Thank you all so much for your insightful arguments and insights. And thank you to the audience for your comments and questions, which kept us on the toes. Have we decided on America's aspirations in Afghanistan? We've had a pretty good go. Our next Democracy Forum debate is at 2 p.m. London time, Wednesday, November the 12th. Vacuum of Power, Gaza's Next Chapter. Now there's a question. Until then, from all of us at the Democracy Forum, stay safe and goodbye. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.